Welcome to Moneyweb at Midday, the actuality news show, offering unique insights and in-depth analysis, featuring South Africa's top business leaders, newsmakers, and analysts for today's professionals. Your host, Jeremy Maggs.
Hello, and thank you for listening to Moneyweb at Midday. In the next 30 minutes, I'll put some context around the numbers, some perspective around the politics, some clarity around the choices facing us in South Africa. A warm Friday welcome. I'm Jeremy Maggs. Coming up on the program today, Operation Vulindlela says reform is accelerating, but with 40% of targets delayed. Is government delivering or just managing promises? One registration weekend remains before the local government election. Can the Independent Electoral Commission persuade disillusioned voters to turn out in November? How an infuriating 6 a.m. spam call inspired a homegrown app helping South Africans reclaim control of their phones. And the hidden procurement strategy that could give retailers their next big advantage. It's Friday, the 31st of July. Operation Vulindlela says structural reform is beginning to unlock investment and improve state performance, with progress reported in electricity, in freight, rail, water, visas and digital government. But its latest quarterly assessment also shows 40% of reform actions are delayed or are off track. And I think that raises questions about whether policy activity is actually translating into results that ordinary South Africans can see. Well, someone at the centre of all of this is Rudy Dix, who's head of the Project Management Office at the Private Office of the President. Rudy, welcome back to the programme. So is Operation Vulindlela genuinely changing the economy, or as a result of this latest report that we see, still producing plans, laws and institutions rather than measurable results?
Hi, Jeremy. Thanks for inviting me. Well, as I said, I think it's important to contextualize it, right? And not spinning. When we say that 40% is off track, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not being implemented. They're slightly off track because, as I've explained, there may be technical aspects. So let's deal with two of them, right? Energy reforms, and particularly the most fundamental reforms that we have never seen in the last 30 years in our energy space. The formation of the wholesale electricity market and, of course, the unbundling of Eskom. What we are seeing is getting into much of the weeds and the details, and therefore requires additional technical work. So they're slightly behind schedule, but the work and the momentum continues. And I think that's really the important thing to understand. Similarly for logistics, we spent a bit of time on getting a network statement that's bankable, that can get third-party operators, private sector operators, onto the rail network so we can unlock additional 24 million tons. That needed quite a bit of work to ensure that we get an agreement on the network statement. So that's really it. It doesn't necessarily mean that we are not committed to the reform program. It means that we're getting to where it really matters, the nub of issues that require for us to now say this is how we're going to unbundle Eskom and create a transmission system operator. This is what we're going to do in logistics in moving forward. And that, I think, is the important point that I want to make, Jeremy.
Not quick enough, though, to meet the needs, the urgent needs of the economy and its growth.
Well, certainly, of course, but reform is a slow process, isn't it? And unfortunately, I think there's huge amounts of expectation. We still stick with the numbers, both independently done by the Bureau of Economic Research and, of course, internally by Treasury and South African Reserve Bank. But the reform is an important basis for us to catalyze economic growth. And we still think that if we fully implement the reform aspects that we've announced in phase 2, that we will hit 3% by 2029. As we set out.
Let me pick you up on the wholesale electricity market that you referenced, due to open externally early next year. But I think the question is, how can a competitive electricity market succeed while municipal distributors remain financially broken and distribution reform is still facing significant challenge?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's really the crux and the nub of it. And if you had noticed, for example, the report that we released. I think there's a press release that we've issued early today or late last night on the ESCOM restructuring task team. You would have noticed that as part of the unbundling of the and creating a transmission system operator, we have set up a separate work stream under that by the two director generals, the director general in the presidency and the director general in the national treasury, to particularly address fundamentally those concerns. Because you're spot on. If you're going to set up a wholesale electricity market, you've got to fix the distribution and allow also municipalities, for example, or to utilities, distributed electricity distribution utilities, to participate in that market. So it is a fundamental. And what is that? Financially sustainability. It's why part of the reforms is to ring fence those utilities so that you are able to pay for the bulk electricity that you buy, professionalize it, but also ensure that you invest in maintenance and infrastructure. So that's quite critical. A lot of the interventions that we've done over the years have not achieved the desired results. So we've got to think about the long-term reform around it. But your observation is correct. We've got to deal with EDA and we've got to move with it as quickly as possible to ensure we can have a successful, competitive market.
All right, let's move on to rail that you also referenced. 11 private train operators, if I've read this correctly, have signed rail access agreements. But again, the question is, when will businesses actually see more freight moving reliably by rail?
Well, certainly we've seen some significant progress. I think not knocking on to the 200 and 250 million tons. The minister has set 250 million tons as the target for 2029, 2030. What we have seen from the low of 2023, when we were doing 149 million tons, we're now pushing at about 168 million tons in the last financial year. The private train operating companies would see an additional 24 million tons. So that's an important part as we move towards the target. A lot of it is dependent on the ability for us to be able to raise capital, both internally through the budget facility for infrastructure, or design concessioning deals, private sector participation on fixing the rail network. It is really the rail network that is in a dire state, Jeremy, that requires for us to be able to make that investment so we can get more volumes on the iron ore line, on the NAPCO, the line that runs from Johannesburg, which is our container line, on the coal line, or on the chrome line. It is really a factor of us being able to put huge amounts of money quickly and fast in partnership with the private sector to ensure that we maintain and fix a broken system, a broken infrastructure, a rail infrastructure, so we can get greater volumes. And what we're doing is, of course, ensuring that we can support the maintenance that Transnet is busy doing, and the budget facility for infrastructure is an important aspect of that.
The other big issue, of course, is water. It's a big problem, particularly in urban South Africa. The water project pipeline, I think it's valued at around 100 billion rand. How much at this point, Rudy, is fully financed? How much is under construction and actually delivering water as we speak?
Well, a lot of them are already in quite advanced stage. So you're correct, it's 100 billion. About 60 billion of that is close to financial close. And so we are able to ensure that we can move towards construction and announce commercial operation dates. There has been a kink in our sort of value chain of getting it from project pipeline into bankability, COD, and then, of course, the actual construction. Part of it is now to ensure that the infrastructure fund of South Africa and the water partnerships office are able to unlock that. We set a target because we don't want to continue hearing about a project pipeline, and that's quite an important part. And the target is both at a wholesale level or at a raw water pricing level, at bulk, and then of course also at distribution. So we've got to move pretty fast and get many of those projects into construction, and that's a critical focus of the National Water Crisis Committee, Jeremy.
Rudy Dix, thank you very much indeed. Head of the Project Management Office in the Private Office of the President.
Moneyweb at midday for all your up-to-date stories.
South Africans have one final weekend to register in person or update their details ahead of the local government election on November 4. More than 23,000 voting stations will be open Saturday, Sunday, while online registration continues until the election is formally proclaimed and the voters' roll closes. The first registration weekend recording almost 2.9 million transactions, but after turnout fell to just 46% in the 2021 municipal elections, I think the bigger challenge is getting registered voters to show up. I want to talk now to Masego Shiburi, who is Deputy Chief Electoral Officer. Masego, welcome. And can the IEC, do you think, really reverse voter apathy when its main causes are political failure and public disillusionment? It's an important weekend, but you've got a big hill to climb.
Indeed, we have a big hill to climb as a country. The electoral contribution can contribute, but it on its own can reverse the lack of participation given what we understand are the roots. One, lack of participation is driven mostly by political disillusionment rather than a disinterest on the part of voters. So voters have opted out of the political and democratic system because in their assessment there is no benefit in continued participation. On our part, we want to remove barriers to registration, barriers to participation, and we make available the research that we have done to political contestants to say to them, here is what the South African voter is saying. In your campaign, in your messaging, reflect on this, and maybe if you do, this just might invert the downward trend related to participation in elections.
In terms of turnout, as far as the IEC is concerned, what then would constitute success in November? And is the Commission prepared to set a target?
We have not set a numerical target, but we are acutely aware that the health of a democracy may be measured by, among others, the rate at which people are still invested in it. In other words, the rate of voter turnout. We wish to have as many eligible voters turn out to vote, and therefore the campaign that we are running to invert the representation on the voters' roll, opening of voting stations to offer convenience in access to the right to vote, continued presence of special votes to make sure that those who do not participate because they are unable to physically present at the voting station are also not left out. But on our part, we have not set a numerical target, but we accept that voter turnout is a key indicator of the health of a democracy.
And particularly among young South Africans. Before the weekend, as I understand it, more than 70% of eligible 18 and 19-year-olds were still unregistered. How many remain outside the system?
The estimated voting age population in the country is around 39 million South Africans. We have about 28 million of those. The majority of people who are not registered are young persons because we are increasingly a young population, one, but they've had fewer proportionate chances to register to vote. Our target is still primarily those young persons. We've run school programs. We've gone to all tertiary institutions twice this year. We've gone out to communities to try to reach out to young persons. But what is reassuring is that from our research is that once registered, young persons are more likely to vote than any age cohort. So our obligation is to get those young persons in. And we know once they have registered, they are more likely to turn out and vote than any age cohort.
With online registration available, Masego, why does the IEC still remain so dependent on expensive national registration weekends?
We understand the physical voting station registration as an equalizer of opportunity, because with that, every one of us with a little bit of effort can access a voting station very close to where they reside. Whereas online is limited by the type of gadgets that the voter possesses, whether they have access to data, where they are located, they have access to internet and those type of things. So we think a important national project like elections cannot be circumscribed by the status of the citizen. So it must be available in spite of the circumstances of the voter. So for us, expensive as it is, voting station-based voter registration drives also registers the most yield for us in terms of the number of people that are registered. Over the last registration weekend, we interacted with over 3 million people. 2.6 million of those were persons who presented physically at the voting station.
And what is the IEC doing about intimidation, so-called political no-go zones and disinformation, which we know could discourage participation in registration and voting for that matter?
We are indeed worried, but we are also encouraged by the resilience of the South African voter, because in all the research that we've done over the past elections, intimidation has not dissuaded persons from turning out and participation. People report that they were being intimidated, but it has not dissuaded them. On the date that the minister proclaims the date of the election, the code of conduct comes into effect, and it criminalizes actions such as those of creating no-go areas. So there is a statutory framework within which we can then deal with those people responsible for no-go areas and intimidation. We are updating the code of conduct to bring it in line with modern-day campaigning tactics, i.e. to deal with disinformation, in other words, purposeful misrepresentation of facts in an election to sway the behavior of voters. So we had opened an opportunity for submissions on our draft code. The date for submissions closed the day before yesterday. We are looking at all those submissions with an intention to issue an updated code to deal with disinformation, which is largely perpetrated on social and new media.
Masego Shiburi, thank you very much indeed, the Deputy Chief Electoral Officer.
You're listening to Moneyweb at midday.
Now, a spam call at 6 o'clock in the morning, as I read it, prompted one of South Africa's young technologists to build a tool aimed at helping consumers fight back. It's called Fok Off Mensa and combines community reporting, call blocking, and formal papier requests, as well as data breach monitoring. But my question is, can another app truly solve a problem created by weak enforcement and widespread misuse of personal information? Well, the founder is Matthew Riddle, and he joins me on the program now. So, Matthew, as I mentioned, something frustrated you to create this tool. Call at 6 o'clock in the morning. How did the thought process work from there?
Well, basically, I figured to myself, there must be a way to tell these companies to leave me alone. So I went and I did the manual process of logging a papier letter and everything, and I found the process to be quite tedious. So I thought, maybe there's a way to streamline things. And that's when the thought process of building an app and the website came together.
Does your app then actually stop spam, or does it simply help users manage a problem that, as we well know, continues unchecked because these things have a way of seeping in through other pores?
Well, I mean, based off the data, I have a few data from my beta testers when we were testing the app, where we actually got responses from the information regulator saying they were taking it forward. And a lot of my beta testers reported a lot less phone calls. So the important thing to note is the app does two things: a short-term fix, a long-term fix. The short-term fix is that you can use the community shield to proactively block numbers from phoning you, and then the papier requests, which takes a little bit longer time because you need to give companies notice, but that basically sends formal written documentation to the companies to tell them to leave you alone.
And Matthew, in simple language, how is this materially different then from the spam blocking tools that we already have?
So I've taken a look at a lot of our competitors, and a lot of them are internationally based, which is great. And by all means, if a user is winning with one of them, that's the goal. But none of them are actually sending papier letters to companies or to the information regulator. So this is very tailored towards the South African people and our rights.
I absolutely understand it's early days yet, and I get the popular opt-out and deletion request, but the issue here is, and you're probably still to determine this, what proportion of those companies will actually comply?
Well, luckily, there are things in the pipeline that we're going to be moving forward with. I'm not going to reveal all my secrets on the call, but there are some future pipeline plans to say, well, if the information regulator fails, there will be another catch net that we can use that would still use your South African rights with. We're busy in talks with various partners to see how we can do this, but I've already thought about the next step.
This sounds like a real crusade for you.
Well, I mean, my main goal is to help people. One of my beta testers was my mom, right? And she received countless spam calls. And the fact that she tells me I'm really not getting any more spam calls, she loves the app, that makes it worth staying up until 3 a.m. programming, because at least I'm helping someone.
And never underestimate, Matthew, the power of a mother's influence, but maybe that's a completely different conversation at some point. You've promised not to sell user data. What information, Matthew, must users still surrender to make the service work optimally?
Okay, cool. So basically the main ingredients would be your email address and name, right? Your cell phone and ID number, it will only be used when you submit the form, but that information doesn't get stored on the server, right? So it'll be a manual process where you would need to retype your ID number the whole time. But the email address would be on our server. We have various security measures in place, where we make sure that the server's locked down. We're following the ISO standards of all the big boys in the world. So we're continuously striving for security is our main thing.
How big is your operation? Is it just you, or have you now got a team behind you?
My loving partner is helping me out on her off time. But other than that, it's just me.
Is there a threshold that a number's got to cross, Matthew, before it's blocked for other users as well?
Yeah. So basically, a number needs to be reported by 10 different people, right? For it to be labeled as potential spam. And basically, we have algorithms in place that would then go reverse look up the number to try and find a name for the company. If it can, it updates the database and pushes it for everyone to block. If it can't, then it would give a potential spam label, and then people still have the option to block. With this, I do understand that some people say, well, what happens if I want to be phoned by a company? In the app itself, there is a unblock list where you can go through and unblock numbers. So I'm really giving all the power of control over to the users. I'm just giving them options.
Are you not always, to an extent, playing a game of whack-a-mole here? Because it's difficult to identify the responsible company when call centers use or change numbers all the time, particularly if they're operating on behalf of several clients.
I guess to a degree it could be a whack-a-mole effect, but like I said, there are algorithms that I'm busy developing and speaking with partners so that we can kind of narrow the gap, if that makes sense. The reason why I'm not going into great detail about it is we're still in conversations and, signing the deal, as it were, but we're potentially very close to closing those gaps.
What sort of response have you had so far?
From the users, the overall response has been amazing. A lot of people have been reporting that they love the idea, they love the app, they love using the app. And also I've been receiving phenomenal constructive feedback, rather, where people will say, hey, look, I downloaded your app, but it's doing this weird thing. Can you help me fix? So I'm very grateful to the community that's given me a shot.
And just a final one, I fully understand that you're a good son that wants to help his mom, but you also want to monetize this. How are you going to do that?
Yeah, so we work with subscriptions. That basically helps me keep the infrastructure alive, right? If I need to upgrade servers, buy licenses, all that. There is a free version and then a 29 Rand version for Community Shield Plus, and a premium version, and then a family plan. They're all on our website. They're at different prices, but the idea is that money basically just helps me keep infrastructure alive, develop and develop better tools for the app. But again, it's completely optional. There is a free version for people to use.
Have you taken some stick about the name?
I think out of a lot of responses that I've had over Facebook and everything there's been maybe one or two people that were saying, it's a little bit of an unprofessional name, but everyone else seems to love it. So it seems like the overall community feedback is it's a funny name.
Matthew Riddle, thank you very much indeed. He is the founder of Fokoff Mensa. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Moneyweb at midday for all your up-to-date stories.
Now, retailers are under pressure from weak consumer demand, rising operating costs and margins that are already painfully thin. But one of their biggest potential savings may lie not in the products they sell, but in everything they buy to keep the businesses running. What am I talking about? Well, packaging, technology, marketing, logistics, even uniforms. I want to talk to Malcolm Herbert. He's Chief Financial Officer at the business services and procurement company Sapphire about why procurement behind the scenes could become retail's next major profit lever. Malcolm, a very warm welcome to you. So is the thesis here that retailers are wasting millions because they don't properly control what they spend behind the scenes?
Well, Jeremy, first, thank you. Thank you for having me. And in essence, yes. Let me also make the caveat as I begin that some are procuring really, really well. We've seen that. But others definitely are leaving some rands and cents on the table. And in essence, what we almost look at this as trying to do is almost turn what is a consumable, which is often not seen as a very important part of the business, turn that into an asset of some kind to contribute to your bottom line.
So, Malcolm, you cite savings of more than 150 million rand. That is an impressive number. What specifically changed then to produce that result?
Right, let me get into the weeds a little bit and give you one or two examples. It's not just a case of looking at price and perhaps jumping from supplier to supplier for better pricing, because that can often create other problems. And it's also multifaceted. So by one example, purely by changing the DC by 600 kilometers, bringing the items into our DC, what we did just by that geographical move, we saved 27% on freight on consumables outgoing. That's an example number one. Then secondly, on price, if we look at something like till rolls. So what we did there was we analyzed the till rolls. Of course, the first and fairly obvious thing, I think every retailer does this, they would look very carefully at the length of paper they're using. However, the thickness of that paper is another factor. So we changed the GSM on the paper. We saved money, number one. Secondly, we saved weight. So that translates immediately into 700 trees staying in the ground every year. And you're saving on freight costs because you are distributing less paper. So that's just by way of example. It's multifaceted. It's not just on price. And the benefit of that brings a green story. So that also brings BPA-free chemicals. BPA is removed from that tool slip. And so you also have a good news green story and an eco journey on sustainability to tell as well.
You talk about the weeds. I'll refer to it as the minutiae, and I understand exactly what you're saying. But surely this is a difficult sell within a corporate to start looking for those small and incremental differences. It can be time-consuming, surely.
Definitely can. But what we can do is relatively easily, and as I say, we actually did this with another retailer. What we would then ask, we would say, just tell us, because we play very open cards. We do not mark up what we are then moving on their behalf. We have a very transparent savings model that we do with them. So what we would ask, give us your top 10 consumables. Tell us what price you're paying, and we'll do an audit for you. If we can't find you savings, we'll pat you on the back and say, well done, you are procuring very well. And we have found that in some cases. We have actually found some incredibly good procurement. But what we then do is we put a laser focus on those items, we analyze them, we then see if we can find savings, and we come back with what we feel we can do for them.
But you can't cut into the quick. The difficulty is reducing expenditure without damaging service quality or customer experience. You've got to be cognizant of that.
100%. I think it's actually critical, because as much as as much as these items in terms of, as I said, globular turnover are a microcosm, they are business critical elements. Business critical, and therefore it is absolutely impossible to say, okay, we're just going to go and change on price, and yet service levels are going to drop. We can't actually have stock for you. Cannot ever do that. So you are absolutely correct. These are business critical elements. Always have to be in stock. Always have to be available and deliverable.
Is it not easier just to put a bit of pressure on suppliers to cut their prices?
Well, I think that is something that perhaps 20 or 25 years ago used to work. I think increasingly, with a global strain on procurement, with a laser focus on cost control, increasingly, the more that happens, the more the supplier ultimately has a very, very difficult job trying to deliver the same quality and at the same price and still give it to you in the same service levels. So it's a lot more than that. And I think these days, procurement departments are getting cleverer about not just who they are buying from, but what they are buying. Is this the right product for what we're getting? And not just to squeeze the supplier, because ultimately it'll hurt you in the long run.
Could this approach shut smaller businesses out of major corporate contracts?
I don't know I honestly don't believe that that's the case, because if you are procuring properly, you actually are doing your homework to get to the best source, the best producer of an item. And at the same time, it is incredibly important that on your eco journey, I think part of what comes into that discussion is your socio-economic spend, where you are particularly looking for MMEs and SMEs who are able to bring what you need at the right price. But I understand what you're saying. If you just put downward pressure from the top down, generally, your suppliers who are buying much bigger quantities can achieve a better price purely on price alone. But if you add price, quality, service, and sustainability, I think smaller players can definitely be in that discussion.
Malcolm Herbert is Chief Financial Officer at the business services and procurement company Sapphire. Malcolm, thank you. And that's where we are going to leave it for today and, in fact, for the week. You've been listening to Moneyweb at midday. We are here every weekday at noon with the latest in current affairs, the economy and policy. You can always catch the podcast version a little later. Thank you for making us part of your day. Until next time, goodbye.
Listen to the daily live stream of Moneyweb at midday or download episodes on moneyweb.co.za, the Moneyweb app, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or follow Moneyweb News on social media for more updates. Moneyweb, your trusted source for business and investment insights.